Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Well Hung History, where we tell true tales of the condemned and the executed. Our topic today includes both assassination as well as execution, so get ready. You get a twofer on this one. I'm your host, Terry Allen, and thanks for joining us. Our protagonist and our antagonist is Leon Czolgosz, who was the assassin of the 25th President of the United States, William McKinley. And if you've never heard this man's name before, you're not alone. Let's bring in a friend of ours, all the way from Warsaw, to get this pronunciation correct.
Leon Czolgosz.
Now that we've got the name figured out, or as best we can, we'll take a deeper look into Czolgosz and let's learn together about his biography, his motivations, his lethal actions, and his ultimate punishment. Some basic biographical information. Czolgosz was born in Detroit to a Polish immigrant family, and he was born in May of 1873. Let's picture a typical immigrant family from Eastern Europe at that time, blue collar, living in the Rust Belt of the United States. And they moved regularly, it seems, through Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Leon had 7 siblings. His mother died young, but it's a curious footnote that his father actually outlived Leon by more than 40 years. He died as a centenarian. He had little formal education. He followed in his father's footsteps. And he's working in sort of coal mines and factories and living, as many people did in that era and in that place at that time. As a young boy of an immigrant background from Central and Eastern European heritage, he would have been an observant Catholic. But he becomes very dissatisfied with the Catholic Church. He becomes increasingly curious, and he becomes gradually active in not only opposing the church, but he embraces a socialist ideology and eventually an anarchist ideology. And these were movements which were gaining traction in the industrial region of where he lived in the United States at this time. So we're going to talk a little bit about anarchism, and that has a different tone now than it would have had at that time. And it's important to put things in context. And a lot of immigrants, mostly from Southern Europe, we'll be talking about people like Luigi Galliani, Peter Kropotkin from Russia, people from Eastern and Southern Europe that brought with them an anarchist philosophy, which was often very much in open opposition to the basically Anglo-American idea of democracy and capitalism as it existed at the time. But as it relates to Leon, by his mid-20s, he becomes increasingly radicalized, and he's wedded to these anarchist causes. After being laid off or quitting one of his transient jobs, he relocates with one of his brothers to property that his father had purchased in the town of Warrensville, Ohio. And during this period, he attends a speech delivered by the radical anarchist and feminist Emma Goldman. It seems he was able to meet Emma Goldman in person and ask her to recommend a reading list to further his understanding of his newfound ideology. He seems to have made enough of an acquaintance with her that she introduced him to a man named Abraham Isaac. He was the publisher of a widely distributed anarchist broadside called, quote, The Free Society. And this was formerly known as the Firebrand. Let's think of Czolgosz at this point as being sort of innervated by these ideas of left-wing anarchism, if we can call it that, which would have been known amongst the working classes of a place like Chicago at this time. His social awkwardness and impulsive and intense interest in this new passion actually raised concern amongst the anarchist crowd, and he was suspected by them of being a probable government spy that was bent on infiltrating their movement. This guy is really hyped up. He's really into this movement to the point where he's scaring other people that are very radical. As we'll soon learn, he was definitely no government agent. He was no mule, and he would prove this in the most dramatic way possible. So his disenchantment with the American capitalist system continues to mount, and he begins to whisper to his few associates that he feels the need to act and to try to remedy what he feels are the societal ills of the country that was brought about by unequal wealth distribution. It's not really meant for this podcast. It's a much more complicated situation. But let's think of Eastern European immigrants during this period, a period of mass immigration that's only been surpassed in recent years, by the way, where people would have brought all sorts of radical ideas from their native countries, and they collided very dramatically with a sort of a nativist movement in the United States. And though he was a native-born American, he would have shared probably a lot of these radical views of his family and other people that were disseminating different radical views that would have been in opposition to the stereotypical founding of the United States. So now we cut to the chase of what he's really known for, if he's known for anything, and it's quite dramatic. And he was deeply affected by the assassination of the Italian king Umberto I in 1900. This king was assassinated by the anarchist Gaetano Bresci. I hope I pronounced that right. Bresci, who was a native-born Italian of roughly Czolgosz's age, he had spent considerable time in the U.S. where he had become deeply committed to the anarchist cause. And he returned to his native country to kill the king, and that was his sole purpose, and he did carry that out. Bresci was sentenced to life in prison, but he committed suicide soon after his imprisonment and was considered a martyr. And there are many monuments to him in his native village today. Though this may be a footnote of history, this was not lost on Leon Czolgosz. So now we're going to get to what he's really known for, and that's the assassination of President McKinley. It was widely known that the president was to travel and to address an audience at the Pan American exhibition in Buffalo, New York, which was to take place the following year. There's a reason why most Americans don't even know of William McKinley, and Czolgosz really is that reason. The idea of the Pan American exhibition, Buffalo, New York, we've got a growing country. Buffalo was a really booming place at that time. And this was a huge event, especially for the country at this time. 8 million people were there, and they were being hosted by a city of 350,000. That's quite a stunning number. This is 1901. It is known that Secret Service protection, such as existed at the time, were concerned about the safety of the president, but he dismissed these worries and he proclaimed he was excited. He was there to greet the assembled throngs and perform his oration. On the last day of August of 1901, Czolgosz takes a train from Cleveland to Buffalo, not that long of a journey, and he rents a room in the center of the city. He purchases a revolver, and he remains there quietly for roughly a week in preparation for his eventual deadly deed. About a week later, this is September 6th of that year, the president was essentially doing a meet and greet inside a bandstand, and Czolgosz waited in line to greet him. As he approached McKinley, the president reportedly extended his hand, and Leon slapped it aside, produced the pistol, and shot him twice in the abdomen at point-blank range. Other bystanders immediately pounced on Czolgosz, and there was a man named James Parker. He just happened to be the son of slaves who was working at the exhibition, and he punches Czolgosz in the face, and he reportedly broke his nose, and Leon was immediately taken into custody. Picture this. There was an outraged scene of onlookers. This crazy guy from the Midwest attacks the president. So all mayhem ensues. So the cops had to fend off the mob by force, who were, not surprisingly, bent on killing him. This is actually, I think, quite interesting as a detail. As an interesting footnote, James Parker, this man that subdued him, became a minor celebrity after this. He's said to have remarked to a newspaper soon after, quote, "I heard the shots. I did what every citizen of this country should have done. I am told that I broke his nose. I wish it had been his neck," which is a great line, by the way. And I think probably, I'm just assuming here, I think probably everyone, regardless of your politics, would have probably felt the same. And again, as a second footnote, Parker's 15 minutes of fame resulted in a lifetime of pain. And after being committed to a lunatic asylum not long after this episode, he died destitute and alone, his body unclaimed, and sent for anatomical dissection. The bullets from the assassin's gun did not immediately kill McKinley, and initially the wounds were not considered to be fatal. And if you ever learn or read anything about this, you'll see that there's some questions about the professionalism of the doctors that handled him. So I'll leave that to the doctors and other historians that might have more information on that. But 8 days later, he being McKinley, did succumb to his wounds via an infection caused by his injuries, and he dies. Czolgosz was visibly injured, and he was jailed in various holding cells until being transferred to Auburn Prison in New York, which was a maximum security institution and remains so to this day. While awaiting his inevitable fate, he was said to maintain a certain calm, and he freely associated with his prison guards. He refused to cooperate with his attorneys, as well as the psychiatrist whose job it was to testify to his sanity. Czolgosz made no attempt at confession, and he stated repeatedly that he wanted to plead guilty. But for some reason that I don't understand, he was overruled, and officially his plea was entered into the record as not guilty. Unlike today, and with obvious public pressure, the trial and eventual sentence moved very quickly. And this has to be a classic in the annals of capital trials. Even Czolgosz's attorneys made no real defense and offered no witnesses, as the accused refused all contact with them. And on top of that, the defense attorneys instead were said to have gone to great lengths to memorialize the late president. So the jury took less than an hour to convict him of murder, and the sentence was death. Some of the jurors claimed that they cast their votes in a matter of mere seconds. He took the news of his sentence in stride, and as it was a foregone conclusion, if there ever was one, 2 priests were sent to minister to him, and he twice ushered them away and told his only other visitor, quote, "Don't you have anybody praying over me? I'm dead. I don't want any of their damned religion." He refused any attempt at appeals. His father sent him a letter wishing him, quote, "good luck," and also, quote, "you now have to pay for your actions." He seemed to not be worried about this. Again, this is a man who was an unrepentant atheist, an unrepentant anarchist, and he sticking to his guns literally. His last words were, quote, "I shot the president because I thought I could help the working people and for the sake of the common people. I am not sorry for my crime." On October 29th of 1901, only a month or so after McKinley's death, he was strapped into the electric chair at Auburn Prison, and this time 1,800 volts were shot through his body. So this represented roughly 10 years after the first ever electrocution in history, ironically in the same place and in the exact same electric chair, that being Auburn Prison in New York. Despite the pleas of his brother and another family member, his corpse was not released for them for fear of mob violence. Instead, his body was autopsied and eventually doused with a sulfuric acid as to prevent any looting of the grave.
This concludes the latest episode of Well Hung History. Run away and cry now, but before you do, make sure to subscribe and leave us a killer review. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the rest. New episodes drop regularly. Tom Payne Productions, all rights reserved and preserved.